What's the worst meal you were regularly served and forced to eat as a child? Cake. See, when we came to Canada, my family was really poor and my mom had a cake business she would do on the side. We were at the time scrapping by so much that most of my lunches consisted of the extra cake slices from my mom's business. Now you would think as a grade 1-3 student that cake would be the most awesome lunch ever, but it got real boring really fast. So I've hated cake ever since I was a little kid. It had its bonus though. Since most kids loved cake, I would be trading it for bologna sandwiches, which to this day I find so delicious since I was deprived of it, random snacks and pogs. One of the few poor lunches you could actually barter with. This thread is making me so grateful for my mom. We were dirt poor and I always thought she was a good cook who did a good job with what she could afford. After reading this thread, my mom is goddamn Julia Child with a tiny grocery budget. Here, cooking quality food on a limited budget for a family is a damn difficult task. My thanks to all those moms, dads, older brothers and sisters and family members who took upon that task. My parents both worked and I had to stay with a family friend who babysat us. Every lunch she fixed us Campbell's tomato soup with grilled cheese sandwiches. She was one of those women who felt children should be forced to eat every bite on their plate. It turns out it actually is possible to screw up a grilled cheese sandwich, and to this day I absolutely cannot stand Campbell's tomato soup. Boarding school in Ireland in the 1980s. Saturday lunch dessert was always yogurt. They were often so far past their sell-by dates that they had a layer of mold on top. Green potatoes. Sour milk on our cereal. Stale bread, also sometimes with mold. Kippers. Seriously, who would ever voluntarily eat a kipper? Every few weeks, the whole school would be mysteriously ill with a bug going around, the symptoms of which were eerily similar to food poisoning. Seriously, green potatoes can be poisonous. Solanine is no fun. Remember kids, while not all nightshades are bad for you, green potatoes are about as fun as eating belladonna. Stuffed eggplant. My mom made it all the time and I hated it. She would tell me I'd miss it once she was gone. I miss her a great deal, but her stuffed eggplant, not so much. When I was a kid, I thought eggplant was going to be a big purple apple. How wrong I was. Step 1. Get a baking dish. Step 2. Fill it with pork chops. Step 3. Cover with a can of cherry pie filling. No other seasonings are needed. Step 4. Bake at 350 until pork chops are dry and stuck to the pan. Preferably the cherries will turn to goo then harden. Step 5. Serve and yell at your family when they refuse to eat it. Step 5. Serve and yell at your family when they refuse to eat it. Good times. Good times. My step-grandmother on my dad's side of the family was a lovely woman. Also, a terrible cook. Beyond awful. Her food was barely edible. She is probably where the old saying originated. Never trust a skinny cook. Our family ate dinner at our grandparents' every Monday night. Our entire family, parents included, always ate before going so that we would not be very hungry when we arrived. Lucky for us, she grew up during the Great Depression and believed gluttony was a sin. She actually loved the fact that we were light eaters. This was perfect because we would never have wanted to hurt her feelings. Once, she took my brother out to a restaurant that was having an all-you-can-eat fish night. For years, she joked and talked about the gluttony my brother had on what she thought was a one-night fish binge. One Night Fish Binge is the name of my band. My mother loved potato soup. My sister and I hated it. So when we'd come home from grocery shopping, we'd help mom put the groceries away. We hid the cans of potato soup behind some pots that were never used. When we moved, she found a couple dozen cans back there and was not pleased. As an adult, I now enjoy a good potato soup. Mom never lets me forget. Homemade potato soup is awesome. I always throw in some crumbled bacon, celery and corn. Ham and beans soup. The worst part was the anticipation. It would take 24 hours to cook, so we would know way in advance that was what was for dinner. Anything cooked by my mother. There were times when she tried to be domesticated, but she just couldn't do it. Her cooking was so atrocious that my sibling and I learned to cook our own meals by the time we were 13. Everything she got her hands on was either charred, packaged and pre-made, or completely devoid of any flavor or nutritional value. I fear this if one day I become a mother. I was raised Catholic in the US when we couldn't eat meat on Fridays. Frozen food today is amazingly better than in the 1950s. Even the cheap stuff. Frozen fish sticks were just awful. No wonder I was skinny as a kid. Moose meat stew. Let me tell you something about moose meat. Firstly, it comes from a freaking moose. Have you seen a moose? No, not a Canadian or Northern Lower 48's type of moose, an Alaskan moose. They are freaking massive. By God, they are horrifyingly large creatures. Perhaps twice the size and weight of a horse. Bringing down a single moose can feed a family for quite a while. So when someone goes hunting, a lot of that meat is going to get shared. And oh boy, our family sure was shared with a lot. Sharing is caring, they said. But this kind of sharing is the sort that puts a little bit of hatred in your heart and dread of the future. Dread of that too tough, too tasteless moose meat stew. Moose meat stew multiple times a week. The meat is tough, it's really hard to chew. More bites than not, you're just spitting out the wad of chewed up material because you can't chew it anymore and your jaw is tired. Ever tried running a chewing marathon? No, because that's not a goddamn thing except when you're eating moose meat stew. Even in my 20s it still clicks sometimes. But no, I better not blame the moose meat. Not the precious moose meat. Moose meat is good for you. Moose meat can do no wrong. The worst part is that my mom was an amazing cook. If only she cooked something other than fricking moose meat stew. Want to go to a friend's house for dinner? But what about the moose meat stew? You want to eat tater tots? That's bulls. More moose meat stew for you, kiddo. And I get it. I truly do. When in Rome. Yada yada yada. But give me king salmon, halibut, clams, trout, reindeer sausage. Heck, I'd even eat marmot, which is not a thing we eat. Don't worry, over moose meat any day of the goddamn week. I will freaking cannibalize my family before I eat moose meat again. I will go full out Donner Party on their asses before I allow myself to endure that pain another moment. I will subject myself to the week old gas station hot dog foodborne illness nightmare if it means avoiding more mandibular trauma. Just, please, no more moose meat stew. This made me laugh. I married a farm boy and my brother hunts, and we received half an elk, a side of moose, and like 1.5 deer for Christmas. I got so sick of it I just took an axe to the bulk of it and feed portions of it to my very happy dog. Steak. Not because I don't like steak, but because I like my steak cooked very differently than how my parents used to prepare it when I was a kid. I didn't realize this for a very long time as an adult and missed out on many steaks I could have eaten. My wife went through the same thing as a kid. Her mother's boyfriend's idea of steak night was smother it with onion powder, salt, pepper, then into the oven. Nothing like dry, chewy, poorly seasoned beef to make a meal. He did the same with burgers. I have shown her the light and what properly seasoned beef and a cast iron skillet can do. My parents called it SOS, which stood for crap on a shingle. It was basically a poor man's version of biscuits and gravy. That is, the cheapest Walmart bread coupled with some off-brand country gravy. I hated it so freaking much. Looking back though, we were pretty poor and my parents were just trying to feed us. My mother liked to serve spaghetti with stewed raisins. Like, dump the pasta and some raisins in the same pot, boil for 10 minutes, serve. No pasta sauce. You could get some Parmesan cheese if you'd been good that day. Man, that's a creative way to totally freak up pasta. Not the whole meal, just a part of it. My grandmother always used to pile half-hour plates with canned minted peas. They were freaking awful and mushy and ugh. There was always too much of it on the plate to eat before it got cold even if you started with the peas and ate as fast as you could. But no leaving the table till every last bite went down. So by the end of the peas it was gagging on disgusting, cold, green mush. I can't even look at peas now without dry heaving. Not a usual grandma making you eat story you read on here. Lean cuisines, hungry men dinners, Elio's pizza, etc. All we ever ate was junk, and more junk. I learned to cook at like age 10 and tried to prepare better stuff for myself whenever I could, but sometimes that's all my dad and mom, by association, would buy most of the time, because that's all my dad would eat. That and takeout. Making myself breaded chicken cutlets and rice for myself with canned corn was about as fancy as it got sometimes. Or grilled ham and cheese, and at 15/16 maybe meatloaf. I think you are Matilda. Egg. For breakfast, lunch, and dinner, it was egg. Boiled, scrambled, or fried. For 3 weeks that was what each meal consisted of, a single, solitary egg prepared one of 3 ways. On Sunday things would be a bit better. We got a single piece of dry, white toast to go with our egg at dinner. Being poor as a kid sucked. It's not a meal, but as a side, I liked whole kernel corn. My brother didn't particularly like creamed corn, but he knew I hated it, so that is what he'd ask for. As a compromise, my parents would mix 1 can of each. Yeah, my parents didn't understand that a cup of wine in a barrel of sewage is a barrel and a cup of sewage, but a cup of sewage in a barrel of wine is a barrel and a cup of sewage. Cheese toast. It was a slice of cheese on bread that was set in the oven for 2 minutes. This was when a lot of people lost their jobs about 2004. This included my dad. So my family had to eat whatever we could get. Lots of cheese toast. Holy crap, I just had a realization. I was 8 in 2004 and that was about the time that my family used to have cheese on toast for dinner a lot. I always loved it as a meal because cheese is just hard to dislike. But now I'm realizing that it was because my dad lost his job. I always knew he lost his job, but I didn't have any comprehension of how bad it must have been until about now. Rice and beans. Super cheap stuff you get in bulk. In 3rd grade, my class did a math exercise with bags of pinto beans, practical counting, etc. At the end of the day, the teacher comes up to where I'm standing in the bus line and loads me down with the bags of beans. I didn't know why at the time. Did my mom talk to her? Doubtful. My mom never talked to the school staff. Seemed like Mrs. Livingston just made some pretty insulting, if accurate, presumptions. Sadly, we ate those freaking pinto beans for weeks. Some probably went up the class clown's nose at one point. God only knows what else. But I had something to eat and it was free, so I guess I couldn't complain. Mom used to make us shake and incinerate. My mom believed that pork can only be served bone dry and hard as a rock. I made my first meat out of those pork chops. Yeah, this is pretty common. My mom cooked pork chops until you had to saw them apart. Served with applesauce. Chocolate oatmeal. This solid grey-brown mass of chocolate-flavored sludge made of mostly cottage cheese and soggy oats was something my dad dreamed up during a health kick he decided to take my brother and I on. He would take raw oats, plain yogurt, cinnamon, applesauce and heaping amounts of cottage cheese, then mix it all together. As the final ingredient he would work in several servings of chocolate protein powder all in a big bowl. He'd then split it up into individual Tupperware containers and refrigerate it. By the time we got to eat it, it was mostly solid and had turned the color of how it tasted. I hated it as a kid and dreaded the mornings when I had to spoon feed that vaguely colorless gloop into my mouth. But funnily enough, I have now developed my own variation with more banana, honey and almonds and eat it every morning. Really helps with regularity. So thanks Dad, for making my poops nice, not aesthetically mind you. This sounds like something fit would dream up. One summer when I was about 7, my mom met a guy at the bar. Her first home. She wanted to be with him so bad, but I guess he didn't like kids. So he or she bought a barrel of dried pinto beans, dropped it off and left. That's what we ate for 3 mo. No lie. We mixed them with ketchup, mustard, mayo, barbecue sauce, you name it. I remember we tried to steal food from the A&P but got caught. My older sis Lydia, she's my mom to me, love you, explained our situation, so we got a free ride home by cop who left. Nobody did nothing. I was sent to a foreign school when my parents took us to live abroad, and it was bleak. Every day flavorless rice in a flavorless soup. Cold. It tasted like butt and smelled like butt. Cereal with milk. I refuse to eat it. I hate when it gets soggy and I always ended up feeling sick after eating it. Come to find out I was lactose intolerant. My mother always knew but never bothered to tell the school so they could give me a different meal. One of my moms used to make this lemon fish on the regular, but she would put so much lemon on the fish that it would make me pucker every time I was forced to take a bite, which would get me in trouble because it implied that she wasn't a good cook like other mom. This is easy. I was fed plain Chinese steamed buns and water every day when I was younger. Called mantou in Chinese. At best it was a tasteless mound of flour. However, more often than not my buns were either understeamed or oversteamed. So I would either be eating tasteless wet dough or a tasteless wet brick. This combined with a cup of water meant that whatever steamed mess I ate will expand 10x in size. I usually get a stomachache in 20 minutes, but my parents never believed me. I liked to stop eating, but I was young and refusing to finish your buns and cup of water was asking for a butt kicking back then. Yes, I realize steamed buns can come in many varieties, but plain bun packages are 25 cents cheaper than buns with filling. But guess what my penny pinching parents always bought? Late to the party, but when I was young my parents made me eat oatmeal. Not that bad, but tiny me freaking despised it. It didn't matter how much brown sugar, milk, or fruit was in it, breakfast ended in tears almost every day. So, one morning after we had stayed over at my aunt's place, my parents make me the typical bowl of oatmeal. My aunt kept her spices and sugars in unlabeled bulk bags, so they located the brown sugar and dumped a large amount in the usual attempt to make it more tasty. That morning the battle was fierce. By the time I had finished half the bowl I had been grounded 3 times. So with tears in my eyes I glare at them and challenge them to try it. Rolling their eyes they take a bite and immediately spit it out. The unmarked bag of brown sugar? Yeah, that was beef bullion. They had forced me to eat half a bowl of beef flavored oatmeal. I got Captain Crunch the next day. I have done something similar to my kids. I was sick, with a stuffed up nose and half asleep when I made their oatmeal, which they normally ate without complaint, and apparently I grabbed the chili powder instead of the cinnamon. Oops. Rarely did a meal start out as bad. Our mother merely got on a kick where she would cook the same meal for months. We fondly remember the summer of burritos and the winter of goulash. We'd get so sick of it until she would finally start a different food to beat into repetition-induced disgust. My mom is actually a pretty fantastic cook of Cantonese cuisine, but for some reason, once every few months, she was compelled to make this dish. I don't know the name of it, but it was basically pig's hooves boiled in vinegar. It stunk up the house big time. No one in my family liked it as far as I knew, including herself. Looking back, I really don't know why she ever made it. Maybe specifically to spite my dad when they had an argument or something because he hated the smell. I can only pick one. Maybe it's the chicken noodle soup my mom made. She'd start with a whole chicken, but then never strain or spoon out any of the excess oil. There'd be an oil slick on the top of all our bowls of soup, and each time she made it, my dad and I would get sick to our stomachs. She loved it. Eventually I started refusing to eat it. Or, how about that, no matter what meat she would cook on the grill, it would be seasoned only with salt and pepper, and would be varying amounts of burnt. She liked it burnt. Or maybe it was when we were having a fancy meal and instead of canned green beans, she'd whip out the canned asparagus. I grew up thinking I didn't like steak or asparagus or all these other things because I'd never had them prepared properly. I'm starting to think I'm the only child who liked liver, vegetables, eggplant, and goat brain. I, however, absolutely despised lentils. Not because it tasted bad, but it makes your fart smell horrible. No matter who you are, your fart will kill if you've had lentils that day. Former cook here. I cook lentils at home at least once a week. Pro tip: you have to break down legumes to avoid intestinal gases. You can do this in 3 different ways. 1. Cook the lentils longer than the recipe calls for. 2. Soak them overnight to make them softer. 3. Add acidic ingredients. Tomato is what I usually use. All methods will solve your gas problem. My folks both worked, so it was pretty common to eat leftovers for dinner from Monday to, usually, about Thursday or Friday. Suffice it to say Sunday dinner was a big deal, and featured entirely too much food. Oftentimes this was a good thing. Pasta is fine for leftovers. Grilled chicken is fine for a few days. They didn't gussy anything up. You just had microwaved leftover grilled chicken, but throw some barbecue or ranch on there and hey, not so bad. Burgers though. Ever had a 4-day-old cheeseburger that's been in a freezer bag, bun and all, after it came out of the microwave? Just miserable. The bread is like a gooey cloth substance. The already well done burgers are now mummified. Much like a hot pocket, the burger is magma on the outside and ice cold in the middle. There was always food on the table, so I shouldn't be. But my god, leftover microwave cheeseburgers. There is no amount of ketchup and mustard that can save them. For 4 days in a row. Rice. Rice is great. I'm half Mexican, half Salvi, so rice was pretty much in every meal. But growing up our pantry was never cleaned out. My parents bought rice in bulk and never stored it in a container. Our rice regularly had maggots in it. I don't hate a lot of things, but I do hate maggoty rice. My dad made this green bean casserole that tasted like green beans, slime, and dry dog food mixed together. Inexplicably he took it to family gatherings and my sister and I were forced to eat what was left over with dinners the following week. We'll never eat anything called green bean casserole ever again. Also, I grew up thinking sloppy joes were ground beef mixed with cream of mushroom soup and served on a slice of wheat bread. So I grew up thinking I did not like sloppy joes. Then I had a real one and it was a whole new world. LOL. A possum. God, I hated that. Was so dang greasy on its own. And grandma cooked it in this cast iron skillet that always had like an inch of grease just sitting in it. Horrible nightmares. Bitter anything. I know some people love it, but why would you eat anything that is bitter in its name? You might as well be making poop noodles. Cereal with water rather than milk served in a frisbee. It wasn't even to save money. My father was just incompetent in the kitchen. We bought canned green beans and they were good for a while and then the company changed some stuff and it tasted awful. It didn't remotely taste like green beans and they fell apart while cooking, like paper in water. My parents couldn't taste the difference because they smoked a pack and a half of cigarettes every day for decades. They just thought I was not wanting to eat my greens, but good god, those green beans were some of the worst food I have ever eaten and I would be forced to eat it almost every day for years. Oh man. So tuna salad but with a twist. Let me spell this out. My mom would combine tuna with fruit. I thought it was disgusting, the savory flavor of tuna, which is already kinda suspect coming out of a can, just doesn't pair with a grape and an apple imho. But here's the killer. She's slop it into an ice cream cone. You cannot imagine the horror as a child. Think like 5-6 years old, thinking you're getting a scoop of ice cream only to suddenly realize the truth. It was a disgusting meaty slurry that dripped mismatched fruit juice on your hand as you tried to consume it. I learned quickly to carefully check what I was handed and try to throw that tuna salad out when no one was looking. If only I had a dog growing up. Annie's mac and cheese, with peas mixed in, and because of the shape of the shells, you couldn't pick around the peas because they got stuck in the little suction cups. I still have nightmares. My dad used to make macaroni and cheese with hamburger in it, which wouldn't have been bad if he didn't put half a jar of mayonnaise and raw onion in it. My Asian mother used to send me to school with food that I loved, but got me mercilessly teased. It was normally rice with egg, shit egg and wood ear mushrooms, black fungus, and this thing called fat choy or hairweed, which is a type of bacterium used as a vegetable in Chinese cooking that resembles black hair. When you open your thermos and everyone can smell the hairweed you're eating, you don't have a lot of friends. Wearing a pastel sweatsuit does not help either. Sausages and vegetables. I grew up kinda poor, and it was all mum and dad could afford most of the time, so we had it nearly every day for dinner. Sausages, mashed potatoes, corn, and cauliflower. Not necessarily a bad meal, but when you're a kid and you have it 5 days a week for several years, you really grow to hate it. It took me years before I could appreciate a good snack on the barbie, and I still hate veggies. I agree that would be tiresome to eat so often, but your parents did a good job nutrition wise. A lot of people with a money strict diet aren't so careful, so good on your parents. We were served cabbage regularly, hate it still. Never was forced to eat it though. Also, spinach was STH I hated as a kid. Now I love spinach : 3. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.